Madeline and the twins slept in a room at the front of Villa 5A. Kate and Gerry believed their shuttered bedroom window, overlooking the car park and street, was closed and locked. Every half an hour, the parents would take turns to check on each other's children.
We thought that was the best thing, and it seemed to work absolutely fine, and we didn't have any problem right until the Thursday morning when Madeline said, why didn't you come when we cried last night? We thought, that's odd.
Okay, well, when you look at the word but I mentioned before, that should call your attention to what preceded it. And what Kate had said was 49.4 on Google, if you want to be really specific. And I asked the question, who would want to be really specific in this case? Well, the investigators would be. When a child goes missing, the innocent parent's brain never shuts off. This is why they don't sleep, not just the anxiety, but they replay everything in their mind due to a hormonal rush. The fight or flight hormone is elevated, it's up there. In this hormonal increase, their mind goes to detail, particularly when they try to sleep. They will often call the voicemail of a detective and say, I just thought of this and I just thought of that. Always on alert, high alert. Here we have this type of high alert detail, but not about Madeline, about justifying themselves. So with that context, the context now is they are concerned for themselves. When a child goes missing, this is very personal to a mother, and this is very personal to a father. No matter what, when a child falls, a father feels responsible. The father didn't protect the fall, even though he really has no reason to blame himself. We do that. It's just natural. We speak for ourselves. At this point, I am not comfortable with the word we here, we thought, because now he's entering into what she thought. And listen to his words. We thought, not I, but we thought that was the best thing, and then a pause, or a and it seemed to work, not fine, but absolutely fine. Then he says, we didn't have any problems. Now, when we ask people what happened is limited to a finite number of things. And they will choose which is most important to tell us. When someone tells us what didn't happen is an infinite number of things. So when they tell us what didn't happen, we are on high alert now for very, very possible deception. And here's what we have. Until Madeline said, or when Madeline said, why didn't you come when we cried last night? How old was Madeline when?
Yeah, three, nearly 4. Yeah.
Sure. As a parent, as a grandparent, and someone who taught parenting classes for years, many years ago, children are by nature narcissistic. A child will say, when I cried, not we. The child is not going to show concern at that age for little babies, unless two things. Unless the child is a little bit older, 5 or 6, and the child is parentified, meaning the neglect in the home has been so severe that the 5 or 6-year-old is being the parent to others. Mm-hmm. And you'll see this in child abuse cases where a neglectful mother will say, look how she can cook her own meals on a little hands that should never be near a stove or an oven. The neglectful parent is boasting about it. Well, here, Madeline did not express concern for others crying other than herself. She's too little to do that. It's when I cried. So at that point, based on that pronoun usage, as a professional analyst, I'm comfortable saying this is not a truthful statement.
You now think somebody had either tried to get into the room or was in the room and woke them up the night before?
It just seems too much of a coincidence that she made that comment and then that happened that night.
Yes, what she's now doing is she's floating doubt for people. She's floating doubt. And she's going to do it more intensely coming up in a moment here. But she's allowing for people to enter into an emotion that doesn't exist. And this is very important in statement analysis. When we experience something that is emotionally charged, I once had a man point a 9mm gun at my head as he was robbing someone in a drug robbery. After it was over, I called police to make the report. I was fine. A couple hours later, I shook with emotion. Like, what just happened? The reason being, it takes time for us to process emotions. If I were to tell you a truthful account of what happened, it's not riveting. It would sound very boring. If I process all the emotions years later and I tell it in a storytelling, I would say this. I once stood in the darkness, and when a man pointed the 9mm gun at my head, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And I would tell a story to engage you into the emotions. We call that artificial placement of emotions. Editing, storytelling, narrative building. By the way, I'm not sure if anyone is paying attention at this point. There's a missing child here that I've had no concern expressed for. This is why this interview jumped out at me.
All right.
She's actually bringing to the point where the 3-year-old child is some sort of intuitive expert.
Right.
Your child is missing. What are you doing? When are you going to talk about that?
Looking back now, you think that could have been your one chance to save her?
Well, as soon as I discovered that Madeline had been taken, it just hit me straight away what she'd said that morning, and I just thought, my God, someone tried the night before.
Okay, in statement analysis, we have a number of sensitivity indicators that are very closely associated with deception. In fact, in this sentence itself, there's enough to conclude deception. First of all, she is infusing emotion into reporting what just should have been said. Second of all, she's going to a conclusion. She didn't say, as soon as I saw that Madeline was missing. She said, had been taken. She didn't know that. What parents of missing children do is they report their child missing. They don't know if someone took them, they don't know what happened, or if the child ran away. By jumping to the conclusion, she wants to make sure that you know there's a kidnapping. She has a need to persuade the audience there was a kidnapping. The need to persuade itself underlies the weakness. Then, the inclusion of the emotions at the perfect point of the statement tells us that's artificially placed there, narrative building. Then we have the infusion of deity. This is often found statistically in deceptive people. They're looking for a greater witness than their own words. When I ask someone, why should I believe you? Because I told the truth, because I'm telling you the truth. The weight of testimony is because it's true, which says basically, if you don't believe me, you're an idiot, get a new job. You shouldn't even be investigating because I told the truth. The burden is on you because I'm free because I told the truth. No matter how much you dig, you'll never find contrary because it's truth. The entire weight of the argument is based upon truth. If someone says, I didn't steal the money, why should I believe you? Because I'm telling the truth. 99.9% north, they're telling the truth. That's how powerful it is. They're basing their denial upon truth. When someone has a need to bring in a divine witness to what they're saying, and here in this case of doing that, she's making the assertion that Madeline had been taken, which is already conclusionary, then calling on a divine witness by the inclusion of the word God. Okay? We could indicate here deception by itself and be confident that she's not telling the truth either.
All right.
Oh, excuse me, another point with this, because there's actually a lot more here in this small answer. The word just, in statement analysis, we look at dependent words. Dependent words are those that don't work without another thought. So if I said, this is my only child, instead of saying this is my child, this is my only child, what are you thinking of? The word only means you're thinking of something else. Did you lose a child? Did you try to have a child, couldn't have another one? You know, what happened there? Something happened. In her case, the word just, it just hit me, and the word just hit me is the timing of the emotion. Okay, the emotion doesn't belong here, but it's part of her storytelling. And I just thought, my God, someone tried the night before. The word just there means she's comparing this thought with something else. Deceptive people do it all the time. They're comparing the thought that they're floating for the audience with the truth. what really happened. It's a small point, but when enough small points come together, it's a large point. In that answer, we have her logical conclusion, her comparisons. We have her giving detail that doesn't add up to what children respond like. And we know that at this particular point in the statement, her concern should not be what a 3-year-old thought, but what my 3-year-old is going through right now. And that again is missing.
On Thursday night, Kate put her daughter to bed for the last time.
But my memory of that evening is really vivid. I mean, she was really tired, but she was just cuddled up on my knee, and we read a story. And we also had some treats. We had some crisps and biscuits. And then after they'd done the usual kind of toilet teeth, we went through to the bedroom and read another story, If You're Happy and You Know It. Yeah.
When she moves into experiential memory of what happened, she can choose anything she'd like to tell us. The words she chooses are going to be important. So my memory of that evening, first of all, we have the word that, which distanced herself from that night, and which could be appropriate because it's chronologically it's distant. She said, it's really vivid. It's really vivid. And that's interesting because that type of clarification comes when there's a hormonal increase. The fight or flight hormone, that cortisone and others that rise in the body to the brain, brings great clarity of thought. But if this was a normal, quiet, happy evening, what would cause such vividness in her memory? So what she's doing is she's narrative building, but she's telling us that this night was anything but normal. Now, this is my assertion to the viewers. By saying it's really vivid, she's choosing these words. She's telling us, she wants us to believe that her memory is very strong with details. It's not just vivid, it's really vivid. And I believe her. I mean, she was really tired. Now, she is using her own words. We must believe her. We must listen to her. I believe that her memory of that evening is very vivid because her hormones were on super high alert. I believe that Madeline was really tired, and that Madeline's tiredness is important to this case enough that she's mentioning it here. We should be listening and believing her. But she just cuddled up on my knee, and we read a story. And we also had some treats. This is a portrayal of a really good mom. Okay? Now, I'm asking the viewers to enter into not reality, but the verbalized perception of reality. She's telling you, my memory is really strong for a reason. I believe her. Madeline was really tired, and there's a reason why that's here too. And I'm a really good mom. She has a need to tell us this while her child is missing. Okay? This is often an indication of neglect or abuse. There's a correlation between mothers who, when they go for substance abuse treatment, if a mother says in the in-screening of substance abuse treatment, I'm a really great mom, or portrays it in any way, shape, or form, it's a signal for the therapist to go into the history and find this mother has been involved with Child Protective Services. Okay? In other words, great moms are often too tired to talk about how great they are, just from being tired. It's the need to brag is concerning. Now, her child is missing. At this point, the self-condemnation should be through the roof instead of the boasting. This is not a good sign. I'm believing her as she's guiding me until she talks me out of it. I think they may have read. I think they may have had some treats. In fact, she's given me exact details of the treats because I think she really is vivid memory because the hormones are really high, which is concerning. And then what I mentioned earlier about the normal factor, here we go. The usual kind. In other words, it's a normal, usual night. The need for her to express that tells us it was anything but. It was anything but. Now, the mentioning of toilet, teeth is unnecessary. There's any number of things that you do with a child, but she chooses to include these things. These associations in language are often associated with sexual abuse.
Right.
And this,
I've heard you say that before, Peter, or read that. That seems quite sort of. I don't understand why that might be the case.
sure, and it does warrant an explanation. I was once investigating a robbery, and the employees were asked to write out a statement of what they had done. And one woman wrote, "I woke up, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and went to work." And she included the brushing of her teeth. And in statement analysis, we believe what someone tells us. I believe she brushed her teeth. I also know that when people include brushing of teeth in a statement, it's very rare. It's important to her. It's something that we all do, and 90% plus people don't feel necessary to tell us they brush their teeth. So why would brushing teeth be so important to her? So I spoke to the owner of the business and said, I would like to speak to this young woman about the theft. I said, no, she didn't steal, but I believe she's a victim of domestic violence and she knows who did. And the owners were shocked. How could you possibly have known that? We had met with her. She is in a domestically violent relationship. We talked about it. We've been trying to get her out of it, but she won't listen to us. How did you know? I said, because she brushed her teeth. And they thought that was just crazy. I said, no. What we do is we flag personal hygiene, and we ask you to consider what her life is like. Women that are involved in domestically violent relationships are generally not subject to violence. It is the threat of violence that controls them. So in her world, when she gets up in the morning, she goes into the bathroom, she locks the door, and for a few minutes, she feels safe while she's brushing her teeth and tending to herself. Because the rest of her life is controlled by him. He might text her at work, he might call her at work, he might control things, and what I think happened there was that she allowed him and his gang to enter access into the building to commit the theft. Brushing her teeth was something so important to her that she mentioned it. So whenever we see personal hygiene where it is unnecessary, we explore for these matters. Now, the idea of sexual abuse comes in with water. School teacher notices that little Johnny comes to school every day and he's always clean, but before every snack or after every snack we got him to wash his hands. Like all little children, that's just kind of a norm. One day Johnny comes to school and he washes his hands without being asked, and washes them again, and washes them again, and washes them again, and the teacher says, uh-oh, something's wrong. There's a dramatic change in his behavior, and it has to do with water. Okay. What they have to explore for is the possibility of sexual abuse. When a child is sexually abused very early on, in the bedroom by a trusted family member, the child's sensory is different. And someone may be 40 years old and say, when I went to the store, I opened the door and went in. You can't go to the store without opening a door. Why would he mention door? Because in his brain, there is an association with the sound of an opening door that's with him forever. Because the opening of a door sound may be associated with when he was sexually abused, or she was sexually abused. So we believe what someone tells us. I believe that, they had this personal hygiene with every 3-year-old goes through it. Mm-hmm. But her inclusion is telling me something's wrong. Remember the context also. Her child's missing. She hasn't mentioned a thing about what Madeline's going through, but she's talking about Madeline's hygiene here with detail. Mm-hmm. So I believe what she's telling me in that sense, but I know there's a reason why she's choosing these words. Then when she says the usual kind What she's telling you is something unusual happened between her and Madeline that night.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I asked them to consider that. Now, go back and listen to her words. My memory of that evening is really vivid. I mean, she was really tired. And I think that investigators should consider the possibility that Madeline was given something that made her very tired so she would sleep and not disrupt the dinner. That is not uncommon. In fact, this is somewhat sad to report. I once had to investigate a physician who was accused of drugging children. And he spoke plainly to me and said, I give them cough syrup because their parents are abusive. The state cannot take the children away from the parents, but I know they're abusive. And by giving them a teaspoon of a type of cough syrup that will help them sleep, the parents' drug night will not be interrupted, and the child won't suffer even more so. Mm-hmm. It was a dreadful decision that he made, and he didn't practice medicine very long after that, as you can probably imagine, but it's something much more common than people would believe. Mm-hmm. We have not only that, but we have a doctor here who had access to that sort of thing.
An anaesthetist as well, she was. She was an anaesthetist as well.
I didn't realize that.
Right.
Many examples of how this works out. When someone is accused of sexually molesting a child and the man says, I'm a normal, happily married man. What he's saying is, I don't deny the sexual molestation, but I want you to think I couldn't have done it because I'm married. We're married people, still sexually abuse children. So when the word normal is used, it's an indication, and any word near that, normal, usual, regular, when it is used, it means the person is thinking of something unusual, abnormal, not the norm, while they're speaking, and they're trying to deceive. So here she's revealing a knowledge, if we're listening to her, that this day was, what they went through, that routine, was not normal.
Okay.
I also, before we leave this last quote, we have, she just cuddled on my knee and we read a story and we also had some treats. The word we is used to connect people. It's a very powerful pronoun. It often speaks of unity. And we do not hear the word we between a murderer and a victim. It's very unusual. What this suggests, along with the word cuddled, is something different. The word cuddled, that's what 3-year-olds do. It's unnecessary to tell us that. It is persuasive language. She's trying to portray something as being very close, very normal, telling us that something wasn't normal about it. But the word we suggests something to consider, that what happened to Madeline that night may not have been intentional. And so I am a slave to the statement. The words must guide me, and no matter what my opinion may be, what I do now is I have indication within the language that there is no concern for Madeline, which we'll explore, that Madeline is not alive at this point, and that they are concealing information about what happened to Madeline, but thus far, this is not premeditated. Mm-hmm. This is someone who had a boundary set up in the family, and the ties that bind them together here produce the word we.
Mm-hmm. When you say that night, right, the night that something happened, if it happened, mm-hmm. Are you convinced that it's the night that they said, or do you think it could have been a different night, a previous night?
Oh, it could be the previous night. This could
or previous, not necessarily the date they've said.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because usual is given. Usual is given. What she could be talking about is patterns. Mm-hmm. Speaking of patterns, if this child was given something to make her sleep, it wouldn't have been the first time. And that's what that could suggest.
if you've watched my final film, a lot of people think that they spent 3 days or so before they announced to the public that Madeleine had gone missing. That they spent some time planning it. That's a well, it's all covered in my final film basically. But what we looked at was we went back in time from the point where they alerted the police to try and find evidence of her being alive in photographs and all kinds of things. So there is a school of thought that she died on the 29th of April, which was 3 days before they even reported her missing. So I don't know. Have you not watched that final film?
I haven't yet.
Right. Okay. All right.
Right now, it's not supported by the language, but the reason I mention it is because what I do is I have to be open to anything that comes in, and what I'll say is the language will affirm that, the language will deny that, or the language won't address it. It's called a temporal lacunae, a jump over in time, and at this point, I don't see a deliberate attempt to jump time.
Okay.
And if it comes up later, I'll grab it, but I don't see it at this point.
All right.
At 9 p.m, Gerry checked on Madeleine and the twins.
I actually stuck my head round the door and I just lingered for a few seconds and thought how beautiful she was. And that's the last time I saw her.
This is very concerning. This is a statement that bothers me a great deal. First of all, he begins with the pronoun I, which means psychologically he's putting himself there. This is good. We want him to be there. We want to have reliable information. But the next word is actually. The word actually means he's comparing what he's claiming to do with something else. Why would that be necessary at this point? Then I'd actually stuck my head around the door and I just lingered for a few seconds and thought how beautiful she was, and that was the last time I saw her. At this point, his child is missing, not dead, according to their narrative. Even though he's referencing a specific night, is Madeleine no longer beautiful? And what I ask the viewers is to consider that when you give a detail of a past tense event, the detail should be in the past tense appropriately. When you speak about character or ongoing characteristics of a missing child, it should be present tense. And I thought, how beautiful she is. And that's the last time I saw her. That would be more acceptable. This is a past tense reference to Madeleine herself, not specifically bound up to a detail, but actually, was she only beautiful that night? That's what I mean by an attribute. So when someone uses an attribute of a missing child in the past tense, it's not a good signal. Right. It's not a good signal at all. Now, he also stuttered with the pronoun I. So what we look for is that, does he normally stutter? And he doesn't. He's not a stutterer. The pronoun I is something that we in the English language use millions of times. We are as good at using the pronoun I as we could be as good at anything in this life. When someone stutters on the pronoun I, there is an increase in tension and anxiety. And this stutter bothers me here. And it's important. He's talking about his daughter in the context she's still missing. So while the several things are wrong, he gives a narrative or an emotion. He references her beauty, which should be ongoing, and it's not. And he stutters on the pronoun I. And I still wait to hear concern for what Madeleine is going through while this interview is being conducted. And that's going to be a bigger point as we move forward.
Yeah.
Excuse me. The last time someone sees a missing child is always going to be important.
Right.
This may sound a bit strange, but I believe him. I believe that the last time he saw her, he did linger. And he did think about how beautiful she was. I think this is where she was disposed of. And I'll build this theme as we go along.
All right.
The last time you saw her, you thought how lucky you were.
Exactly.
And that bothered me because that's very poor interviewing. That's why we train journalists to not teach someone how to lie. Because the problem with that is he did not think about how lucky he was unless something was wrong. And that's, I can't say that he thought how lucky I was. He only affirms it for what the interviewer said. The interviewer should not have said such a thing. The interviewer is speaking as if the interviewer believes the child is dead. If you have no guilty knowledge of your missing child and you leave the child to go to dinner, you're not going to have that type of nostalgic thoughts. You're just going to dinner and, we'll miss her, we'll be back in shortly and everything will be fine. You don't have those type of thoughts. Having those type of thoughts is an indication of guilty knowledge that Madeline's gone.
Your world shattered within an hour.
We now have a period of time, and we also have a case of distancing language where he didn't say, my world is shattered. If my daughter was missing, my world is shattered. Not your world, not someone else's world, not everyone's world, because everyone experiences this universally. My world is shattered. I'm the father. What's going on with Madeline right now? No concern. What I'm building towards is this. There's a reason why the McCanns do not show any concern over what Madeline's experiencing right now. They're intelligent people. They're no dummies here. They're intelligent people. They're not concerned. Parents are forever concerned because even Stephen King said, the terrors that a parent's mind can conjure up in wondering what my children are going through is more horrible than anything he could write. Mm-hmm. Our imaginations double down on us when we try to sleep, worrying about every little slip, every little fall of our children go through. They have shown no concern in the most extreme of circumstances. Why not? And they're going to answer that question for me. So Gerry, as a biological father, is telling us that his world isn't shattered. Your world is. That's distancing language.
At 10 p.m, it was Kate's turn to look in on the kids.
At that point, I expect to hear, I got there and Madeline was gone. That's, it's not a discovery. It is a traumatic, personal, up-close personal, extreme event that puts hormone levels so high that if they don't recede quickly, there's going to be PTSD. In other words, the hormonal response of finding your child missing is going to be so extreme that in a few moments, you're not going to be able to reason the emotions down, the hormones down. If you're driving your car, and as you're driving, someone cuts you off, and you grab your wheel, and you can feel the flush of hormones. You feel it physically. It's a physiological reaction. You say to yourself, I'm okay, and your hands begin to loosen. The blood goes back towards the blood flow that initially went out to protect you, and the hormones recede in just a few moments, maybe a second or two, maybe even less than a second. If that hormonal response were to stay elevated for more than a few seconds, it is very likely that 30 years from now you're going to wake up screaming because the brain has an imprint on it. If you walked through the door and found your child missing, the hormonal response is so extreme and there's no reasoning it down, that parent will suffer for the rest of the parent's life, even if the child is found safely a week later. 30 years later, the parent will still wake up screaming because the imprint on the brain, the inability for the brain to process the most powerful of human emotions, of mother-child bonding, it can't happen properly. And so we can mitigate it by trying to get them to process it. Journaling is very helpful, but it is so intense. And that's why the vividness is so powerful. And it's physiological. When you're under attack, when something like that happens, your pupils will dilate, you go on high alert, blood will flow to and from certain parts of your body, your legs will become stronger so you can run. The blood goes away from the internal organs so that if you're knifed, you have a better chance of surviving. The hairs, people say the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It's actually true. Pilo erection, it's called. It is some kind of built-in mechanism to make us look bigger and stronger. Those are the type of reactions that you will have if you find, or I will have, if I find my child being missing. She tells us I had that type of reaction with the conclusion that everything was normal. You can't have it both ways. This is a disconnect that means she's not speaking from experiential memory. She's using certain points of the account, stitching it together in an overall deceptive account.
The bedroom door where the 3 children were sleeping was open much further than we'd left it. I went to close it to about here, and then as I got to here, it suddenly slammed. And then as I opened it, it was then that I just thought, I'll just look at the children. And literally as I went back in, the curtains of the bedroom, which were drawn, were closed. It was like a gust of wind, kind of just blew them open.
This is not a sophisticated liar. This is a silly story where my child is missing and I'm talking about the curtains and blowing and all sorts of emotions. That's where someone who is a police officer, even without terrific training, will say, storytelling. This is storytelling. Well, we call it narrative building, and what she's doing is she's giving the inclusion of emotions, besides many other indicators of problems within the house, including the door. The bedroom door where the three children, not my kids, that's distancing language there, were sleeping, was open much further than I'd left it. That's not what she says. We left it. Does that mean that she and her husband each took a hand and moved the door to a certain level together? Because that's what she wants me to believe. Mm-hmm. She's lying. Mm-hmm. This is deception. The fact that she's using door for deception is because she's building a narrative about a kidnapping. The need to build a narrative about kidnapping says the child wasn't kidnapped. That plainly. And literally, as I went back in, the curtains of the bedroom, which were drawn, were closed. It was like a gust of wind blew upon them. She's asking you to enter into an emotional, fictitious account. This is the writing of fiction. This is something that even Statement Analysis 101 would be able to grab on. Mm-hmm. So I conclude here, deception indicated from this alone.
And you mentioned here again, doors and windows are often found within language of sexual abuse.
Yeah, I'm concerned.
Right.
I'm concerned. This is not a normal family. There are verbal indicators, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Madeline was a victim of sexual abuse. What it could be is in the language of Kate that she was sexually abused while she was growing up. This would leave her vulnerable for things such as neglect. And if you take that to the next step, someone that has been sexually abused in childhood who is now vulnerable to neglecting her own children, possibly even failure to protect, if someone else like her husband was involved in sexual abuse, we would find the need to persuade us, I'm a great mom. We were cuddling. Okay? The reason I indicated deception with that statement about cuddling is because whenever someone says, we call it the I love you factor. I kissed my kids, told them I loved them, and went to bed. Everyone kisses their kids and says, I love you, go to bed. When you see that in a criminal statement, they're telling you something is really wrong between me and the kids. So her need to persuade about the cuddling, if you consider it carefully, you must be open to the fact that she may have been holding a lifeless body and has a need to persuade, no, this was cuddling.
Okay.
This answer, by the way, was one of the most important answers because here we were able to look at the larger measurement of the statement of what happened as she gets into it. And this is a very lengthy introduction. She's not getting to the point of telling us that Madeline is missing and what must she be going through. She is narrative building of even if we just measured it with the scientific measurement of our formula of 25% introduction, 50% content, 25% afterwards, she is heavily delaying getting to the point. and giving lots of unnecessary details. Where do we have more detail? On what Madeline is going through or on the windows?
And the curtains, which had been closed, just swung open into the room and revealed that the shutter was all the way up and the window being pushed right across. And then I just knew she'd been taken.
Right. She goes to a conclusion of the matter, and she goes into present tense language. This is an intelligent woman. She knows how to use verb tenses. When someone is committed to something that happened, I came to the building, not I come to the building. Well, here we have a continued description about the curtains, which is concerning to me, just swung open into the room and reveal that the shutter was all the way up. So if we want to believe what she's going to say is that the reason that she knows that someone has been taken her is because she walked into the room and the room just did magically opened itself up and said, look at the evidence. She's lying.
Okay.
This tells us Madeline was not kidnapped.
Okay.
Kate says after a quick, frantic search of the apartment, she ran back towards Gerry, who was still with their friends at the table by the pool.
I can't remember exactly where the table was. It's kind of in this bit. So it would be about round here. And I was kind of sitting in this bit. Yeah, I mean, Kate was clearly distraught and I jumped up, but it was kind of disbelief. She can't be gone. She can't possibly. How could she be gone? And I was saying that to Kate as we were both running.
Deception indicated, and here's why. First of all, we have him making an assertion. I know where the table was. I know exactly where the table was. So he's giving us an indication, I am on high alert, the same what she had done before. And then, with this precise language, he immediately moves away from it. It was kinda, he now qualifies it, this bit, so it would be about around here. And I was kinda sitting in this bit. So going from this exact, this is a form of self-censoring. He is stopping himself from going to this precise way he has a need to conceal. He then describes his wife's emotion. Kate was clearly distraught. Now consider this. If your child is missing, you're going to be distraught. Telling us that she's distraught is narrative. It's not necessary to say. I didn't think that she stopped to smoke a cigarette and to look at how beautiful the stars were in the sky. Of course she'd be distraught. Telling us that she was distraught is unnecessary, therefore it's very important. But he now looks to persuade me. Not only was she distraught, but she was clearly distraught. In other words, her affect of being distraught was beyond any debate. So I want you to know that when my child was missing, my wife was really, really, really upset. That's goofy. And that's what this is. It's a need to persuade. That sounds, to the average listener, that sounds goofy. And I jumped up. You know, we did not think that you stopped for a cigarette. We did not think you said, okay, let me have dessert first. This is also unnecessary language. And then he says, kind of disbelief. I believe him. Because he knows it's not true. He knows what he's doing is narrative telling. And so the first thing he's going to say is, where is she? We must find her. No, she can't be gone. She can't. She can't possibly be. How can she be gone? This is an important part for your viewing audience to understand. Guilty people will ask questions. They are looking to see what answers are out there. They're looking for responses from even the interviewer, from police, from the audience. They're floating their alibis to see, will you agree? The first thing that anyone would say if your child was missing is, where is she? Not how can this happen? No, this can't be happening. Now, we don't even reach denial stage yet. As a father or mother, the first thing we do is, no, I'm going to find her. She wandered out. The door was open. She's out here, let's get her. They know that she didn't wander out. So he artificially not only imputes his emotions into this part of the statement, he artificially inflates both of their emotions. the fact that he says that he had to do something immediately, and I jumped up, it itself is unnecessary. Of course, any father's going to jump up. He has a need to persuade us. He might, at this point, be reliving the emotions, the motions that he went through in this. So he gives us, he wants us to think that he's in denial. She can't possibly be what? He stopped himself. Be dead? How can she be gone is a question. And I said that to Kate, no. And I was saying that to Kate as we were both running. Now, this is also interesting, and it may be a little bit overkill, but this is what analysts do. We would take this short answer and analyze it for hours. And just one small point here. And I was saying that to Kate as we were running. Nope. As I was saying that to Kate as we were both running. He has a need to persuade that both were in earnest, both were upset, both were in emergency mode, because they weren't. Those that are in emergency mode don't even need to tell us they're in emergency mode, but they certainly don't need to persuade us. His need to persuade that they were in emergency mode tells us this was not unexpected, this was not an emergency. Richard, he's lying.
Okay.